After 6 years together, my fiancé looked me in the eye and said he wasn't sure about getting married. Then in front of his buddies he cracked a joke, "If you were prettier, I'd marry you." That one stung. This morning I got a call from his mom, crying her eyes out. Jason and I had been a couple for a little over 6 years and we'd been engaged for the past 8 months. We first crossed paths at a housewarming party hosted by mutual friends. We hit it off quick, bonded over our shared dislike for IPAs and a love for old-school 95s cartoons. Our relationship moved along at a pace that felt natural. We dated for a year, moved in together after 3, adopted our cat Pickles in year 4, and last summer, he popped the question. The proposal wasn't anything flashy. Just a simple hike on a Saturday morning to our favorite lookout spot. He got nervous, fumbled with the ring box in his pocket, and asked me to marry him. I didn't hesitate, I said yes on the spot. We picked October for the big day and started putting plans in motion. Well, to be honest, I was doing most of the planning while he just nodded and went along with things. Around 2 months ago, Jason started making little comments that felt off. He didn't say anything harsh, but there was a certain hesitation in his voice. When I showed him wedding venues, he'd say stuff like, "That's a lot to spend for one day," or, "Do we really need to invite that many people?" I chalked it up to typical guy stuff. Maybe he was just being practical or worried about money. Then he started taking hours to respond to my texts about the wedding. I'd send him catering options and all I'd get back was something like, "Looks fine," or "Whatever you want." When I asked if he was okay, he'd blame it on work stress. His construction company had taken on some big projects, so it made sense, or so I thought. A few weeks later, he started hanging out more with his work buddy Derek. They grabbed beers after work or watched the game at Derek's place. At first, I didn't think much of it. Nothing seemed too out of the ordinary, just more frequent than before. But when he came home, he felt distant. Always on his phone. Less affectionate. I talked to my best friend, Maya, and she thought it might just be pre-wedding nerves. She suggested we go on a proper date night, just the two of us, to reconnect. So last Friday, I made a reservation at this new Italian restaurant downtown. I put on a nice dress, nothing fancy, just something I hadn't worn in a while, and even picked up his favorite beer for later. I was hoping for a good night. But the evening went sideways fast. He was distracted during dinner, barely talking. And when I brought up our honeymoon plans, he dropped a bomb. He wasn't sure he was ready for any of it. Not just the trip, but the wedding, the marriage, everything. I was completely blindsided. 6 years together, 8 months engaged, and now he wasn't sure? When I pushed him to explain, he brought up some conversations he'd had with Derek. Apparently, Derek had been going on about how marriage changes everything and brought up his brother's nasty divorce. Things escalated quickly from there. I tried to keep it together, didn't want to cause a scene in the middle of the restaurant, but inside, I was falling apart. We barely even touched our food. The ride back was dead silent. Tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. Back at our place, he didn't want to talk, just said he needed space and crashed on the couch. The next morning was nothing short of brutal. We moved around the apartment like strangers renting the same Airbnb. He said he was heading out to meet Derek and some of the guys to catch the game at the Rusty Nail, this bar downtown. I was emotionally drained and didn't have it in me to argue. A few hours later, Maya called and convinced me to get out of the apartment. We grabbed coffee and I let everything spill out. Maya listened quietly, patient as always. She figured maybe Jason was just overwhelmed, pre-wedding jitters and all. Afterward, we wandered around Target for a while. That's kind of my go-to when I'm stressed. I grabbed some throw pillows I didn't need and a new bottle of shampoo. Retail therapy isn't real therapy, but it helps. By the time evening rolled around, I felt a little more grounded and decided to head home. Just as I was pulling into our complex, I got a text from Kyler, one of Jason's co-workers. I'd met him once at their company Christmas party. His message just said, "Hey, are you okay?" Then he added, "Things got weird at the Rusty Nail." I didn't text back, I called him right away. He sounded nervous and didn't want to say much at first. But I pressed, and he finally told me what went down. Apparently, the guys were giving Jason a hard time about the whole wedding thing. When Derek asked if he was really ready to commit to just one woman forever, Jason started airing his doubts. Then, when Derek pushed him on what was holding him back, Jason, drunk, according to Kyler, said, "If you were prettier, I'd be more excited to marry you." He said it like a joke, then laughed it off. Kyler said a few of the guys called him out on it, but Jason just got defensive, told them they couldn't take a joke. I sat in my car, stunned, crying for what felt like 35 minutes. The man I'd loved for 6 years, who I thought truly loved me, just made me the punchline in front of his friends. Over something as shallow as how I look. When I walked in the door, he was passed out on the couch, still in yesterday's clothes. The whole apartment smelled like stale beer. I grabbed pickles and locked myself in the bedroom. Sunday morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee and bacon, Jason's go-to apology breakfast. He looked miserable, clearly nursing a hangover and probably hoping breakfast would patch things up. When I brought up what Kyler had told me, his whole face dropped. He tried to minimize it, saying he was drunk and just being dumb. He claimed the guys were messing with him and he blurted something to shut them up. But his "guys will be guys" excuse just made me feel worse. We fought. I asked how he could humiliate me like that. He swore that wasn't what he meant, that he was just stressed about money and pressure. But I couldn't get past the fact that he made me the joke. I knew I couldn't stay there. I grabbed my purse and headed to my brother Grant's place. He's always been my safe haven during tough times. When I told him what happened, he was furious, wanted to confront Jason himself. I talked him down and told him I just needed a place to stay and some time to think. That Sunday, Jason kept texting apologies, begging me to come home and talk. I sent one reply: I needed space. I called in sick on Monday. There was no way I could pretend to be fine answering phones at the dental office. Around 9 that morning, I got a call from Susan, Jason's mom. We'd always gotten along really well. Honestly, she's been more supportive of us than my own mom, who's off in Florida with husband number 3. Susan sounded shaken. She said Jason had called her the night before and told her something she thought I needed to hear. She asked if we could meet up. And that brings me to now sitting in my car, outside the coffee shop where I'm supposed to meet Susan in 20 minutes. I keep wondering what else there is to learn, and whether my 6-year relationship is really done. I never thought I'd be writing all this. I keep staring at my engagement ring, wondering if I missed the signs. Was I blind the whole time? Or did everything really change this fast? Should I even meet with Susan? What could she possibly say that would make any of this okay? When I asked him why he wasn't at work, he said he'd taken a personal day. He'd apparently been going through all the wedding stuff, trying to figure out how he'd managed to screw things up so badly. I didn't sit down. Just stood by the door and told him straight up, flipping through wedding plans wasn't going to fix what he said. What followed was one of those long, tough talks. He apologized again for the bar comment, called it unforgivable, said he didn't even mean it. I asked why he'd say something he didn't believe. His excuse? He wanted to look cool in front of the guys. That only pissed me off more. I reminded him he'd already been questioning the wedding during dinner before the whole bar thing even happened. And that night he wasn't drunk. He admitted he'd been under a lot of pressure, said one of his work projects was behind. Derek wouldn't shut up with horror stories about marriage, and he was anxious about how much the wedding was going to cost. But instead of coming to me and talking it out, he just let it all bottle up until he exploded in the worst way possible. As we talked more, he finally shared something new. He was scared of turning into his dad. Jason almost never brought up his father. The man left when Jason was 12 after cheating with some woman at work. Moved to Arizona and started another family. Jason always claimed it didn't really affect him. But now he was telling me he was terrified he might be wired the same way, like he was doomed to cheat or walk away someday. I told him flat out, "You're not your dad. Just because he bailed doesn't mean you will." I said your choices matter, not your DNA. He looked at me and said something that stuck. He didn't know if he could truly promise forever, because forever seemed impossible with the example he grew up seeing. I asked if he'd ever talked to anyone else about this stuff. He hesitated, then admitted he'd been opening up to Kyler a bit. Said they'd gotten close since Kyler joined the crew and Kyler had gone through some relationship mess of his own. That explained why Kyler reached out to me after the bar. He already knew Jason was struggling. The conversation turned again when I asked what exactly he'd been feeling. His answer hit me hard, scared, overwhelmed, unsure if he was ready for marriage, even though he still loved me. He said he kept thinking about how his parents seemed solid until, all of a sudden, they weren't. And he couldn't shake the fear of history repeating itself. I asked why he didn't talk to me sooner. He said he was afraid I'd take it as a sign that he didn't love me enough. It was bitterly ironic. By keeping his fears to himself, he'd made the very mess he wanted to avoid. Then I had to ask, did that horrible joke about me not being pretty enough come from a real place? Was there any truth in it? He insisted no. That he'd always thought I was beautiful. He even brought up the first time we met, talked about the green sweater I wore, and how he couldn't land a single beer pong shot that night because he was too nervous around me. He said the bar comment was him being insecure, trying to play it cool so he didn't look like some whipped fiancé in front of the guys. He wanted to seem like he was still in control, not like he was being tied down. Dumb but honest. I asked the question that had been sitting in my gut. Were his doubts about marriage in general, or about marrying me? He paused. That pause said everything. Eventually, he admitted it was mostly about marriage, but yeah, a part of him wondered if we were really right for each other in the long run. That hurt even more than the bar comment. 6 years together and he was still unsure about us? I pressed him for specifics. He said we'd both changed a lot since our early 20s. I'd become more of a planner, less spontaneous. He'd let go of his dream of starting his own business. I pointed out that changing and growing is part of life. That's what couples do. But he just looked at me and asked, what if we didn't grow together? By then I was completely drained. Emotionally wiped out. I told him I needed some time away to think. About everything, his public humiliation, the secrets, the uncertainty about us even being compatible. He begged me to stay, said he wanted to work through it together. Even offered to try counseling. But I stood my ground, I needed space. As I was getting ready to pack up more clothes, he said my phone had been going off. I checked and saw 4 missed calls from Susan, his mom. I'd totally forgotten we were supposed to meet that day. When I told Jason, he looked confused at first, then worried. He asked what she wanted to talk about. I explained how she'd called the morning after the bar, crying, saying she needed to meet in person because of something he'd told her Sunday night. His face went pale and he wouldn't look at me. When I asked what he'd said to her, he mumbled something about their argument and his doubts. But he wouldn't get into details. Just told me I should hear it from her directly. That raised a big red flag. So I stepped out to call Susan. She picked up right away and asked why I didn't show up earlier. I explained I'd been with Jason, trying to get answers. Her voice tightened when I mentioned that. It only made me more sure there was something big I hadn't been told. We set a time to meet up in 25 minutes. Before leaving, I turned back to Jason one last time and asked him what it was that Susan knew that I didn't. He finally looked at me. His face was full of guilt and something like shame. He said there was something he should have told me himself, but it wasn't his place anymore. He told me I should hear it from her. And if I wanted him gone when I came back, he'd be out of the apartment. I packed a week's worth of clothes, some toiletries, my laptop, and left. At the door, he said he still loved me. I told him sometimes love isn't enough. On the drive to meet Susan, I got a call from Tessa, Jason's sister. She sounded worried and asked what was going on. She said Derek had told her what happened at the bar and that Jason wasn't responding to her texts. Their mom, she said, had been really upset. When I said I was headed to meet Susan, Tessa went quiet for a second. Then she asked if the meeting was about Nina. That name hit me like a slap. Nina? I asked. Tessa's reaction told me everything. She stammered, tried to take it back, then told me to please hear Susan out. Wouldn't say anything else no matter how hard I pressed. When I pulled into the coffee shop parking lot, I saw Susan sitting inside, near the window. Her eyes were red and puffy. Whatever she was about to tell me, I had a feeling it was going to change everything. As I walked up to the entrance, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Jason. Whatever my mom tells you, please remember that I love you. I got scared. I made terrible mistakes. I'll understand if you can't forgive me. I slipped my phone back in my pocket, took a deep breath, and walked toward Susan. Second update. Thanks again to everyone who's been reading and supporting me. The comments on my first post meant the world, even if I couldn't reply to them all. Right now, I'm crashing at Lena's apartment. After what Susan told me, I just couldn't go back to Grant's place or the apartment Jason and I shared. Lena's couch pulls out, and honestly, it's comfier than the futon in Grant's storage room. Plus, her cat Pepper doesn't mind if I cry into a bowl of cereal at 3 a.m. As for the meeting with Susan, where do I even begin? The coffee shop was packed for a Tuesday afternoon. A local community college must have just let out, and every table had a laptop and a student behind it. Susan had managed to get a corner booth, the kind with the tall backs that give you a little privacy. She looked different from when I last saw her at family dinner 2 weeks ago. Her perfectly styled bob was a little messy, and for the first time in 5 years, she wasn't wearing any makeup. Not even lipstick. That wasn't like her. She's not vain, just someone who always puts herself together, like how some folks can't function until they've had their morning coffee. When I walked in, she stood up to hug me. She smelled like lavender dryer sheets, same as always. I ordered a plain black coffee, even though I really wanted something sweet and ridiculous. But somehow that just didn't feel right for what was coming. After a bit of awkward small talk, Susan got straight to it. She told me Jason had called her Sunday night in full-on meltdown mode. She said his fears about commitment and becoming like his dad were real, but there was something else weighing on him more immediately. Nina. I nearly choked on my coffee. Nina, the new project coordinator at his company? The woman he'd mentioned once or twice in passing. Susan explained, while nervously tearing a napkin to shreds, that Jason had developed feelings for Nina over the past few months. He told his mom it wasn't physical, at least not yet. But emotionally? He was already halfway out the door. And suddenly everything made sense. The distance. The phone always in his hand. The extra time with his work friends. The stress that I thought was from his job now looked like something else entirely. I asked Susan why she was even telling me all this, why not just protect her son like most moms would? Her eyes filled with tears. That's when it clicked. She wasn't just talking about Jason. She was reliving her own story. She told me how, before Jason's dad ran off to Arizona with a coworker, things had already been falling apart for months. There were cold silences, cruel little comments, and fights that felt like they were picked just for the sake of fighting. She said it was all just a way to push her away without having the guts to admit the truth. She didn't want that to happen to me. Didn't want me left in the dark while Jason quietly slipped out the back door like his father did. And suddenly that awful joke he made at the bar made a lot more sense. It wasn't just some drunken mistake, it was his way of blowing things up without having to make a real decision. Susan and I talked for more than an hour. She opened up about her own marriage, how she tried to save it even after she found out about the affair, how she blamed herself, wondering if she wasn't enough. Before we parted in the parking lot, she said something I haven't stopped thinking about since. She said, the hardest thing I ever learned was that you can't make someone choose you. They either do or they don't. Everything in between is just waiting for the crash. I sat in my car afterward, just staring at my phone. There were 3 messages from Jason. All of them saying some version of I'm sorry. I love you. But none of them mentioned Nina. Still hiding behind half-truths. I didn't text him back. Instead, I called Maya and asked if I could stay at her place. She didn't even pause. Just said she was already making up the couch and asked what I wanted for dinner. That's the kind of friend you need when your world's falling apart. Eventually, I texted Jason. I know about Nina. Don't reach out again until you're ready to be honest. I'll pick up more of my stuff tomorrow while you're at work. Then I blocked his number. Not forever, just for the night. I needed quiet. No more explanations. No more excuses. On the drive over to Maya's, Tessa called. What she said confirmed everything Susan had told me, and then some. She told me she'd overheard Jason and Derek talking last Thursday. She confronted Jason and made him promise to come clean with me after the weekend. Obviously, he didn't. What caught me off guard was how fully Tessa took my side. She's Jason's sister, but she didn't pull the family first card. She told me straight up what he'd done wasn't okay. That was a massive weight off my shoulders. I'd been worried I was losing not just Jason, but the whole family I'd grown to love. Maya's place was exactly what I needed. Neutral ground. A place where I didn't have to explain anything. We ate Thai food sitting on the floor in her living room. Her coffee table was buried under notes from her online classes. A baking competition played on the TV, though neither of us really watched it. The normalcy of it all felt like a lifeline in the middle of my wreckage. After Maya went to bed, I stayed up going through photos on my phone. 6 years of my life with Jason. Trips we took. Birthdays. Silly selfies. Those engagement photos where we looked like we just hit the jackpot. I started planning the next day in my head. Go to the apartment while he was at work, grab the rest of my things, maybe talk to the landlord about the lease. Then my phone buzzed. A number I didn't recognize. Margot, this is Nina. I know you blocked Jason. Can we meet tomorrow? Just the 2 of us. There's more to the story you should know. I just stared at the message, my heart hammering in my chest. What else could she possibly tell me? And why would she want to? After sitting there for what felt like an hour but was probably just a few minutes, I finally replied. Where and when? 3rd update. Thank you again to everyone who's stuck with me through all this. Reading your words during those long sleepless nights really has meant the world to me. As for how I'm doing, I'm hanging in there. Some moments are easier than others. And yeah, I met with Nina. And it didn't go at all like I expected. We met at this breakfast place near the park. Felt like a neutral spot. She was already there when I walked in, nervously flipping through her phone. She looked different than I remembered from the company party. Not all done up. Her hair was in a messy bun, barely any makeup. Honestly, she looked like someone trying hard not to fall apart. If she'd really been having some secret emotional thing with my fiancé, you'd think she'd be smug, maybe defensive. But no. She could barely meet my eyes and kept fiddling with her coffee cup. That's when the first bombshell dropped. Nina didn't even know Jason had feelings for her until Derek let it slip last week. She told me they worked closely on a big project. Sometimes they'd text about work after hours, but from her end it was strictly professional. No flirting. No crossing lines. She even showed me the messages, work notes, the occasional meme, nothing romantic. Oh, and she has a boyfriend. 4 years together. Sometimes he even joined their work happy hours. Then came the second bombshell, Derek. Nina had overheard him pushing Jason to keep his options open before locking himself into marriage. Apparently Derek even pointed to her, Nina, as someone who gets him better than I do. Derek had been telling everyone at work that Jason was panicking about the wedding, making jokes about how he was losing his freedom, feeding that insecurity like gasoline on a fire. By the end of our talk, I felt strangely at peace. Nina wasn't some villain. She was caught in the middle of Derek's stirring and Jason's cowardice. Before we said goodbye, she looked me in the eye and said, "You seem like someone who knows what she's worth. Don't let anyone make you question that." I left that breakfast with a clearer head and a new plan. This wasn't just about Jason anymore. It was about Derek's toxic influence, Jason's fear of turning into his dad, and how I fit into all of it. I texted Tessa and asked if she'd help set up a family meeting at her apartment. Somewhere neutral. I wasn't ready to be alone with Jason again. She agreed without hesitation. Which brings me to yesterday's dinner. Tessa had everything set up in her cozy little apartment. She ordered from that Italian spot down the block. Just some pasta and salad. Nothing fancy. Susan came first. Then Derek. Tessa insisted he be there. And finally Jason, who looked like he hadn't slept in days. The first 30 minutes were torture. We sat around her table, pushing pasta around our plates, making awkward small talk about the weather and Tessa's new coffee table. It felt like the elephant in the room was practically helping itself to the garlic bread. Finally, Susan broke the silence. She said, plain and simple, that we weren't there to chit-chat. We were here to face the truth and figure out where to go from here. That opened the floodgates. I told them what Nina had shared with me, watching Derek closely the whole time. His face shifted, first confusion, then straight-up defense mode. He tried to cut in, claiming he was just being a good friend, looking out for Jason. Tessa shut him down cold. Jason mostly just sat there staring at his plate. When someone asked him a direct question, he finally admitted that Nina had never done anything to lead him on. He'd made it all up in his own head because he was scared. Scared he'd become his father. Susan winced at that. You could see it hit her hard. When I brought up the comment he made at the bar, Jason looked truly ashamed. He said it wasn't about Nina. It wasn't even about me. It was about him being too scared to stand up for the life we built, and too weak to face the truth head-on. He said he didn't mean what he said. That it was never about how I looked. Derek tried to brush it all off as just guy talk, like that was supposed to excuse it. But Tessa cut through the nonsense and reminded everyone Jason and I were supposed to be getting married in 3 months. That hit me like a punch in the gut. We'd already sent the save the dates. Deposits were down. My wedding dress was hanging in Lena's spare closet, just waiting for the final alterations. That's when I finally said it, quiet but firm. I didn't think the wedding was happening anymore. The whole room went still. Jason opened his mouth to argue, but I stopped him. I told everyone how I'd spent the past week trying to piece together how we even got here. And what I'd come to realize was this wasn't just about Nina. Or that awful joke. Or even Derek's toxic crap. This was about Jason not being honest with me and, more importantly, with himself. I told them how I'd ignored the signs. How I'd looked the other way when he lost interest in the planning, spent more and more time with Derek, started pulling away emotionally. I made excuses because facing the truth was harder. But I deserved someone who was sure about me. Someone who didn't need a full-blown family intervention to figure out their feelings. Derek made a snide comment about me being overdramatic, and both Tessa and Susan told him to shut it at the exact same time. Jason said he was sure he loved me, he was just scared of screwing everything up. I told him it was too late. He already had. The conversation stretched on for hours. There were tears, raised voices, especially between Tessa and Derek, and more than a few painful truths. We ended up going over old wounds and digging up new ones. And somewhere around midnight, when we were all drained and done, the truth landed. The wedding was off. 6 years together, and we were done. There was no big meltdown. No slamming doors. Just a quiet understanding that something essential between us had broken. Trust. Maybe one day it could be rebuilt. But not in time for an October wedding. Not while Nina still worked at his company. Not with the echo of that joke still ringing in my ears. Tessa drove me back to Lena's afterward. On the way, she told me this didn't change how she or Susan felt about me. That I was still family in their eyes, no matter what happened with Jason. When I got back, I sat alone on the pull-out couch in the dark, letting the truth sink in. 6 years, gone. Wedding canceled. Future unknown. I didn't even cry at first. Instead, I opened my phone and started a checklist in the Notes app. Call the venue and cancel. Probably lost the deposit. Return the ring. Let guests know. Move out. Update social media. God. The social media part felt like its own kind of heartbreak. It was after 3 a.m. when Lena came out of her room. She'd heard me come in and just wanted to see how I was doing. I told her the wedding was off. She didn't say anything, just sat beside me and wrapped her arm around my shoulders. We stayed like that until the sun started coming up. We didn't need to say much. Just being there was enough. When I woke up this morning, I had a text from Jason. He wanted to meet and talk about practical stuff, the lease, the bank accounts, what to do with the furniture. It felt so cold. So final. Grant had messaged too, asking when I needed help moving out. That's him, always straight to the point. My mom had texted as well. She'd already heard, probably from a cousin following Tessa on Instagram. Wanted to know if she should cancel her flight for the wedding. The ring on my finger felt like it weighed 100 pounds. I kept twisting it around without realizing. Just a nervous habit, I guess. It was simple, a round diamond, white gold band. Classic. That's why Jason said he picked it. Just like us. The irony was hard to ignore. I called the venue first thing. The coordinator was kind but firm. The deposit was non-refundable. $8,000 gone. Money we'd spent a year saving. We'd skip trips, dinners out, even birthdays to afford that. The logical side of me hated the waste. But the emotional side couldn't even focus on money right now. Tessa texted again. She found a photographer who might let us transfer the deposit to a different event down the line. Susan said she'd help call some of the relatives to spare me the awkward conversations. Small kindnesses, but they meant a lot. Derek, of course, sent a half-hearted text, something about everything happens for a reason, and how I'd find someone more compatible. I deleted it without replying. Nina reached out too. Short message. Said she was sorry about the whole thing and swore again that nothing ever happened between them. And you know what? I believe her. She feels like someone who just got caught in the middle of a mess she didn't create. A projection for Jason's fears and a pawn in Derek's games. But the hardest part? It's not the texts. It's the small stuff. The wedding binder still in my bag. The Spotify playlist for the reception. The folder full of honeymoon ideas on my laptop. Just bits and pieces of a future that's now gone. Lena told me to take a mental health day, but I went to work anyway. Sitting at home scrolling Reddit and spiraling seemed worse. At least answering phones and filing paperwork gave me something to do. My coworkers were normal, thank God. Either they didn't know or they were doing a really good job pretending not to notice my swollen eyes or the missing ring. Tomorrow, I'm meeting Jason at a coffee shop. We're going to trade keys and figure out what to do about the apartment. Since my name's on the lease, he's agreed to move out and crash with his cousin for now. Another step in the business of breaking things apart. It still feels unreal. Just last month, we were tasting cake samples and arguing over the playlist. Now we're dividing up the kitchen stuff and figuring out who keeps the PlayStation. I keep thinking about something Susan said during dinner. Endings are rarely clean. Most of the time, they're messy and hard and full of pain. She would know. She raised 2 kids alone after Jason's dad left. Built a whole life from scratch again. You wouldn't guess it now, seeing her smile. Maybe that's the hope in all this. For now, I'm just taking it day by day. Tomorrow, I'll deal with the apartment. Next week, I'll start looking for a place of my own. The rest? Still blurry. But it's there. Tessa texted again. Asked if I wanted to get coffee this weekend. She also said her family friend Walter, this older guy who's known them forever, offered his vacation cabin if I needed a quiet place to think. I didn't expect Jason's family to still have my back, but I'm so grateful they do. I haven't decided yet if I'll take Walter up on the offer. Part of me wants to run away somewhere peaceful. Another part knows I still need my people right now, Maya with her steady calm, Grant with his big brother protection, even Susan and Tessa with all their messy loyalty. What I do know? I'm done checking the wedding countdown app. No more pinning reception ideas. No more practicing a new signature with Jason's last name. That life is gone. And while I don't know what's next, I'm starting to believe there is a next. The engagement ring is still sitting in my dresser drawer, tucked away in its original box. Jason told me to keep it or sell it, said it'd be bad karma if he took it back. I haven't figured out what I'll do with it yet. Some days I completely forget it's even there. Other days I open the box and just stare at it, wondering how something so small could carry promises that felt so big. Social media had its own kind of hellish aftermath. I waited 2 weeks before changing my relationship status. I dreaded the questions. When I finally did it, 3 a.m. on some random Tuesday, the notifications came rolling in anyway. Well-meaning friends asking what happened, distant relatives sending prayers, and people I hadn't talked to in years suddenly sliding into my DMs with concern that felt more like nosy curiosity. I posted a short, vague message about making a mutual decision and asking for privacy. Then I muted the notifications and tossed my phone across the couch. Later, I shared a photo of my new apartment keys with the caption, "New Beginnings." It didn't get as many likes as the engagement post, but it felt a lot more real. As for Jason, we've only talked a handful of times since the breakup and just about practical stuff. Mail that got sent to the wrong address. Shared cloud accounts we forgot to disconnect. Returning his sister's air fryer. Each conversation has been polite but stiff, like two strangers making small talk in an elevator. He's still working at the same company. Still hanging around Derek, though Tessa told me that's gotten tense lately. He's still staying at his cousin's place. And according to the ever-reliable Tessa grapevine, things got awkward between him and Nina after the breakup. She requested a transfer and has kept her distance since finding out the full story. The biggest surprise came last month. Jason texted and asked if we could meet. We hadn't seen each other face-to-face since we exchanged apartment keys, and I'll admit, I was curious. We met at a coffee shop close to my new place. Neutral territory. Plenty of witnesses, as Lena had half-joked. He looked different, thinner, with shadows under his eyes and wearing a shirt I didn't recognize. The first 10 minutes were filled with stiff conversation about the weather and work. Then he pulled out a journal. He said, "I've been seeing someone." My heart skipped for a second before he clarified it was a therapist. The journal was part of his therapy. He'd been writing reflections, trying to track down patterns in how he thought and acted. He told me he'd been digging into his relationship with his dad, with Derek, and especially with me. He didn't ask for forgiveness. Didn't try to rekindle anything. He just wanted me to know that he was trying to be better. I should have done this years ago, he said. Maybe things would have turned out different. It was the most self-aware I'd ever seen him. And honestly, I hope therapy helped. Not for me, that chapter is over, but because no one should carry that kind of family baggage alone. It's exhausting. Right before we parted ways, he mentioned he'd heard I was still close to his mom and sister. I'm glad, he said. They need good people in their lives. And that's been one of the weirdest parts of this whole thing, staying connected to Jason's family while disconnecting from him. Susan texts me almost every week. Usually something funny, a meme, or an update on her garden. Tessa and I grab breakfast every other Sunday at this little diner halfway between us. They've both been respectful. Never put me in uncomfortable positions, never overshared about Jason. They've honored the boundaries I've set. As for me, I wish I could say I've had some grand awakening, that I've found myself through this heartbreak. But it's messier than that. Some days I feel free, grateful I didn't marry someone who could hurt me the way he did. Other days, when the hot water goes out or I can't reach the top shelf, I miss the comfort of having someone there. Even just the practical stuff. I've started therapy too. Not just because of the breakup, but because it made me realize how much of myself I gave up in that relationship. How many red flags I overlooked because they came dressed up as comfort. How often I made myself smaller to accommodate Jason's insecurities. My therapist has me working on reclaiming parts of myself that got lost. I started hiking again on Saturday mornings, something I used to love but gave up because Jason hated waking up early. It feels good to have it back. Dating? Feels far off. My coworkers keep hinting about some guy they want to set me up with. I'm not ready. Maybe in a few months. Maybe longer. Right now, I'm learning how to enjoy my own company. The most unexpected twist came with what should have been the saddest part, canceling our honeymoon. We'd booked a 14-day coastal getaway. Of course, it was non-refundable. I ignored the calendar reminders for weeks, couldn't bear to face losing that money too. Then Maya threw out a wild idea. Go anyway. Alone. You've never traveled solo, she said. Maybe it's time. At first, it sounded depressing. A romantic cottage for one? Like the setup for a sad indie movie. But the more I sat with it, the more I liked the idea. No compromising. No agenda. I could sleep late, read a whole book in one sitting, wander wherever I wanted. So next week, I'm going. Just me. I packed a few paperbacks, downloaded some podcasts, and bought a new swimsuit, one I picked entirely for comfort, not to impress anyone. My mom thinks I'm crazy. Grant offered to tag along for part of it. I told him no thanks. Tessa jokingly told me to get on a dating app. I told her, maybe someday. Not now. I don't know what I'll find on this non-honeymoon. Maybe some peace. Maybe more questions. Probably a sunburn, knowing my luck. The other day I was at the grocery store and our song came on over the speakers. 3 months ago, I'd have ducked into the frozen food aisle and cried. This time, I just felt a soft ache. Like pushing on a bruise that's finally starting to fade. That's progress, not perfection. I won't pretend I have it all figured out. My shower still blasts freezing water without warning. My basil plant died again. Sometimes I catch myself picking up my phone to text Jason something funny. Then remember we don't do that anymore. And yet, here I am. Still standing. Still healing. Still moving forward one imperfect, resilient day at a time. Thanks for sticking around and listening to my story.